Welcome to Combat Sports Talk, a podcast dedicated to UFC and Bellator discussion, the MMA community, and combat sports in general. My name is Ryan Smith, and I am here to talk to you about what's going on with the podcast. So last week I was in Munich, Germany, freezing my tail off, and the time zones made it almost impossible for me to be able to do the show with KC and John. So I'm here, I'm back, I'm ready to do the show. I was ready to do the show yesterday, and it's just been a ton of technical difficulties. Yesterday it was me and KC, and we had just a ton of network drops. My network dropped twice, and so it ruined the video recording, and so we decided to postpone and try to do it again tonight. Tonight, we just dealt with all kinds of technical difficulties, and so, the guys are tired, it's late, we've been trying to do this for a couple of hours, and unfortunately, we do not have a show for you tonight. But I can tell you what we plan to talk about. We wanted to talk about Alan Crowder because we didn't get to talk about UFC ESPN 1 with Henry Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw. So we want to talk about Greg Hardy and how he got disqualified for kneeing Alan Crowder. The thing is that we felt like that the heat that Greg Hardy was taking for his action was unwarranted. That it was something that happens in the octagon, but because of his history of abuse or alleged abuse, he's taking unnecessary scrutiny because of it. The fact is that we collectively felt like the UFC should not have put him as green a fighter as he is on such a big stage, that there's still plenty of time for him to work his way through the heavyweight division to earn that spot in such a prestigious location, that perhaps putting Cowboy Cerrone in that spot, the co-main event spot, would have been a better option. Of course, that's hindsight being 2020, but that's something that we thought might have been a better choice given the outcome of what happened. Of course, we talked about Henry Cejudo and TJ Dillashaw. Of course, everybody, specifically KC, felt like Henry Cejudo really did defeat TJ Dillashaw, even though he said he did not lose. Fact is, Henry Cejudo caught TJ Dillashaw, a fight that lasted 35 seconds. Which did not meet the buffer factor, which means that TJ Dillashaw could have been knocked out 4.3 times in the 2 minutes and 20 seconds Bruce Buffer took to announce the fight. So, as we say, a fight should last at least as long as it takes to announce it, and this one didn't. But I don't feel like TJ Dillashaw should hang his head. I mean, it was one of those things where fighters get caught. When a fight lasts 35 seconds and you've got two elite fighters in the ring, it doesn't really tell you a lot about the whether or not one fighter is better than the other. It just says one fighter got caught, perhaps he was being sloppy, and that's what happened. I want to see this fight roll back to 135. I want to see them fight again, and where TJ Dillashaw can defeat or defend his title versus Henry Cejudo in his weight class where he feels comfortable. And if Henry can do it again, he deserves to be double champ. If not, well, then now we've got a conversation that we can really talk about where Henry Cejudo can't win at 135 and TJ Dillashaw hasn't shown his ability to win at 125. So let's roll that back. Going on to Bellator 214, what I call the Red Crescent Stepchild. This was featuring Fedor Emelianenko versus Ryan Bader for the Heavyweight Grand Prix. This took place on January 26, 2019 at the Forum in Inglewood, California. Inglewood. The main thing to talk about is Aaron Pico was defeated by knockout in the first round by Henry Corrales. This fight was one where it was Aaron Pico's fight to lose. He's an elite wrestler and striker. He's wonderful at that. Rocked Henry Corrales, went in for the finish, and just committed, really kind of like Cody Garbrandt, and really just pinned his ears back and went forward and got caught. That's what happens. In the main event of the evening, Ryan Bader defeated Fedor Emelianenko, the last emperor, via first-round knockout with 35 seconds in the first round. Now, this is what we would call a buffer factor fail, but because Bruce Buffer does not announce fights in Bellator, we're going to call this the Michael C. Williams fail, and this was a buffer factor fail of 3.1. That means it took 110 seconds for Michael C. Williams to intro the fight. The fight didn't last very long, so Fedor Emelianenko would have been knocked out 3.1 times by the time Michael C. Williams finished announcing the fight. Let's go on to to a couple of headlines that I want to talk about. This is what we call finding the angles, and really want to talk about Ryan Bader. I mean, now he's the double champ, the first double champ of Bellator. Who should he be compared to? Everyone wants to see these crossover fights. Bellator has shown that they're willing to do crossover fights with Rizin, so why not get those talks in about Bellator having that fight with the UFC, seeing if they can put their double champ against one of the UFC's double champs, namely Daniel Cormier, especially given the fact that Daniel Cormier said that he wanted an easy fight right before Ryan Bader left for Bellator, and now we would see double champ versus double champ, the two biggest promotions in the world. Let's see what happens. The UFC's debut on ESPN Plus, I thought went fairly well. I enjoyed the fights. It was a nice way to watch the fights, and $4.99 wasn't that expensive for what you got. My thoughts on the UFC Legacy belt is that it looks like a toy. I mean, granted, it's new and it's going to take some getting used to, but all I could think of was UFC Fight Kit. Whenever I thought of it, and just seeing it on Henry Cejudo's shoulder, it's too awkward. I preferred the older belt, but maybe it will grow on me in time. Last thing on the ESPN Plus event, Stephen A. Smith. Everybody was giving Stephen A. Smith all kinds of trouble about how he was making comments about the fights. It was clear Stephen A. Smith didn't know the sport. He doesn't know it. But he said that he didn't know the sport. I guess the bigger question is, why would you have someone like Stephen A. Smith, who has such a polarizing effect on people, that's, and such a strong voice, at an event like this? And all I can say is that you do that because he is part of the ESPN royalty. And so when you put him in an event like that, it lends credibility to the sport, to the event, for people who watch ESPN and not the UFC. And so that's that kind of crossover personality that they're trying to get. And he admitted as much, that, hey, I don't know a lot about the sport. Dominic Cruz or John Anik and Daniel Cormier, you guys were, coaching me backstage. Hopefully I can do you proud and talk about this fight. Yeah, he doesn't know the sport. Hopefully he'll learn more about it as they've got all the fights planned across ESPN, ESPN Plus, and the pay-per-view. So after UFC 232, Jon Jones was tested and came back clean. Subsequent tests came back and showed that he still had those metabolites within his system. That spawned a huge conversation, I'll say a debate, between me, John, and KC. We were on opposite sides. I felt like the UFC really needs to legitimize Jon Jones, and I think in order to do that, you've got to create a standard that says that there is an acceptable amount of turinabol metabolites that they are willing to tolerate within their system, within a fighter system, and in order to legitimize that, because right now you've got a standard that says zero picograms, 0 grams of any type of metabolite within your system is acceptable in the UFC. And therefore, Jon Jones, arguably one of the greatest fighters ever to grace the octagon, is sitting as an exception to the policy. So you've got two choices. You maintain the policy, and you penalize Jon Jones for violating the policy, even though there appears to be nothing he can do, and that the violation is in such a small quantity that it doesn't enhance his performance. However, if you do that, then really what motivation does Jon Jones have to even fight? Otherwise, what you can do is create a standard, but that still, I think, creates motivation for some fighter to try to get the formula right and say, I'm going to start using PEDs, and once I get turinabol in my system, then as long as I keep it under 100 picograms, or whatever the standard is, then I'm good. So I don't know if there's a win-win situation here, or it seems like a lose-lose situation for the UFC. And so, frankly, I I'd love to know what someone else thinks about it. But, basically, John and KC were in this position of, the UFC needs to maintain its integrity and its purity, and if that means that they're going to have to sanction John Jones in the process, then so be it. But I don't know if you can go that far. Last thing, the Nevada State Athletic Commission came back with their ruling after the last fight at the fight between Khabib and Conor McGregor. Khabib got the main part of the punishment, 9 months and $500,000 fine. Conor got 6 months and a $50,000 fine. A lot of people feel like Khabib is getting the short end of the stick here. All I can say is this: Conor did a lot of talking. He did a lot of things to instigate what happened in the fight after the fight. But at the end of the day, he did not throw the first punch. He did not go and jump the cage and all the things that happened. Khabib did, and in so much as Khabib tolerated all of the abuse throughout all of the lead up to the fight, that it's unfortunate that Khabib went after Dylan Denise and the rest of the corner of Conor McGregor. I feel like what he did warrants a 9-month suspension and a $500,000 fine. I'm glad that Conor got some type of punishment, even if it is a fraction of what Khabib did. Khabib said in response that he's never fighting in Nevada again. That's his prerogative. He's too big a fighter for that to hurt him. So, I see that as, that's the natural outcome of what's going down there. If we go to the fight card and look at the fight coming up this week, you've got UFC on ESPN Plus 2, Asunciao versus Moraes 2, Saturday, February 2nd, 2019 at the Northeast Olympic Training Center in Fortaleza, Brazil. We've got 6 fights on the card. The main ones, though, is Jose Aldo versus Renato Moicano. I think that's a great fight. This is going to show us whether or not Jose Aldo has the staying power. He's been fighting for a very long time. He's come off some brutal fights versus Max Holloway. Renato Moicano is such a game fighter that this is going to tell us a lot about Jose Aldo and whether or not he can make one more run at that title, or whether or not Moicano is going to be taking his place and relegating Jose Aldo to gatekeeper. Main event is Rafael Asunciao versus Marlon Moraes. I'm excited about this fight. This is always, when you have a few of the smaller fighters getting in there, the speed, the agility, the athleticism, it's always fun to watch, especially when it's happening in Brazil. Rule number 2 is never bet against the Brazilians when they're in Brazil. Unfortunately, you've got Brazilians fighting Brazilians, so you can't go wrong. This is going to be a really good card. Last shout out to Damian Maia, who is back. Lyman Good is his opponent. I hope Lyman Good has studied up on some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because he's going to go down. And what I like to call Damian Maia, the Anaconda, is going to choke him out or submit him. So that's it. Follow us on social media. On Twitter, I'm at CST Ryan. KC is at CSTKC, but he only uses it to troll other people, so don't follow him there. Find him on Instagram. John Keys is the Keys to Victory with an ES on Keys. He's both on Twitter and on Instagram. He doesn't post much, but if you want to follow him, you absolutely can. You can check out our website at www.combatsportstalk.com, and you can also find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Facebook, and Spotify. We have merchandise. You can get one of these shirts, Combat Sports Talk shirt. And, we have a new section for live events. We haven't done a live event in a while because I was out of town for the December one. The January one got canceled. So we're coming into February. We're finally going to get to see and hear from our double champ, George G Money Stallworth. All right. Let's go. Let's get this done. Our theme music is composed by Scott McCurry at scottdeancountry.com, and KC Onyebuchi produced our lead-ins. I want to thank you for joining us for an annotated version of Combat Sports Talk. For KC Onyebuchi, for John Keys, for George Stallworth, I'm Ryan Smith, reminding you, keep your hands up. Chin tuck. Go Bar. Go Red.